from Indiana, Hazen's brigade?
Well, the brigade, there's only 3 regiments. They're greatly reduced. 41st Ohio moves probably furthest into the field. But the regiment that I tend to focus on the most here is the 9th Indiana. And not just because it's got a couple of different interesting stories around the battlefield. The tactical formation, or the tactical fighting that the 9th Indiana does here is pretty remarkable. Hazen's, the short version of what happens with Hazen is essentially his 3 brigades come into the field. Suddenly there are Confederates everywhere, and they're getting attacked from Confederates coming up from the south. Brown's brigade is here. We'd mentioned this morning that Brown's brigade was kind of contained in this area, expecting some sort of Union counterattack. It's quite possible, maybe even probable, that they spotted the southward movement of Hazen's brigade, or at least some piece of it. So they're there. They're not necessarily advancing. They're in a static position, but they are there. And then there are Law's Alabama, 3 regiments of the Alabama Brigade under Colonel Oates and those Bushrod Johnson troops further south. So suddenly these 3 Union regiments are effectively all alone. Both of Van Cleve's brigades have gone through the woods and are falling back very quickly, very rapidly. And so the 41st Ohio gets the furthest south and then starts to pull back. The rest of the brigade starts to pull back, and the 9th Indiana is, for a time, the furthest south regiment of the brigade somewhere in this field. And realizing that they're facing Confederates here and here, Colonel Suman of the 9th simply doesn't order a rapid retreat. He knows he's going to basically get overrun if he does that. He does a series of maneuvers where he fronts his regiment here and fires this way. I forget the exact command.
Changes front to the rear on the left company.
On the left company. And he falls back and he fronts and he fires that way. And they do the same thing. So they stair-step their way back out of the field. This is a remarkably difficult thing to do under fire, repeatedly, moving backwards. It would be somewhat easier moving forwards, but to do it moving backwards, it's one of the most complicated pieces of drill maneuver on a battlefield that I think I've ever read about.
Because you basically do an about face, so you put your back to the enemy, and then you do a wheel. And then you about face again, so you're again fronting the enemy. But you've got your back to the enemy for a time. So,
and
how much
double
dirt?
quick.
Yeah.
You're not doing it slowly on a flat level field. This field is at least open, so you're not trying to do it in the woods. But you're doing it at the double quick or the run. And they effectively disengage, cover the retreat of the rest of the brigade, and fall back into the woods. How long this takes, I'm not sure. I mean, it must be 15, 20 minutes minimum. And it buys enough time. I think it provides enough of a speed bump for all these Confederates that only Clayton eventually gets out into the field. And as we've discussed before, there's also no larger controlling hand here. There's nobody coordinating multiple divisions over this part of the battlefield to orchestrate a better defense, or a better offense, which probably helps Colonel Suman and the 9th Indiana to a certain extent, because Confederates see them and fire at them, but there's not a coordinated attack in response to the coordinated retreat.
How strong is the 9th at this point in time?
Under 300 men. I couldn't give you the exact number. It's been a while, but they're not they're under 400 when they go into the fight. They've suffered some casualties in Brock Field. They have anytime you suffer casualties in combat, you also suffer stragglers, the men who help their friends to the rear or just simply become separated during movements. so if you had 51 casualties, you might actually be down 70 or 80 men. But I believe they're certainly under 300 men. They might be as few as 250.
Hazen had a reputation of a well-drilled brigade, though. It was one of the best brigades in the Army of Cumberland, wasn't it?
Yeah, Hazen put an emphasis on, fire discipline. All the more ironic since he fires up to 40,000 rounds. But doesn't like individual or fire by file. He likes fire by rank or volley fire by battalion. He tries to put an emphasis on disciplined aimed fire as opposed to just load and shoot and load and shoot. Again, but he actually will later in the battle on September 20th, he will comment on Emerson Opdyke's regiment, 125th Ohio, over there on Orchard Ridge, commenting on, because Opdyke had been a member of the 41st Ohio in his brigade, commenting on how well disciplined their fire was. It's certainly one of the better drilled brigades in the Army. They can perform evolutions that maybe would be beyond most regiments.
And the men of the 41st Ohio, a small number of whom had served in some of the 90-day regiments at the beginning of the war, some of these men resent this regular Hazen being made their colonel, they think Hazen is too much of a disciplinarian. However, by this time, Shiloh and Stones River have really convinced the men that no, Hazen's strict discipline is actually, there's a benefit to it. And so Hazen, the view of Hazen by the men of the 41st Ohio has increased. And I think that's true by and large for the men of the 9th Indiana and the 6th Kentucky. Hazen, those three regiments are paired together from early 1862 on till after Chickamauga. However, the relationship between Hazen and Isaac Suman, the relatively new colonel of the 9th Indiana, has been deteriorating since the spring of 1863. But the regiment still is well disciplined. This is the same regiment that in the fighting at Stones River in December, on December 31st, when Hazen is defending the Hell's Half Acre or the Round Forest area. The 9th Indiana had been in reserve. They'd been in the second line, and they were being moved to the front. And their colonel at that time decided to move them to the front, not simply in line, but by the flank, that column of fours. And they had marched up, and at least in the aftermath of the battle, other men in the brigade, the 41st Ohio, the 6th Kentucky, the 110th Illinois, they will remark that it was silly for the 9th Indiana to try to come up and relieve, I think it is the 41st Ohio at that moment, to relieve one of the frontline regiments. I think it's the 41st, and it's silly for them to come up marching by the flank. But they say the 9th Indiana is so disciplined, so well trained, that even when an artillery projectile, Confederate artillery projectile, comes over the front line of the brigade and enters the march by the flank, column of four of the 9th Indiana, and explodes in the middle of one of the companies as it is marching, and knocks down, kills, and injures a number of men of that company, while the men following behind never break a step, and they simply step over or go around the men who had been affected by the blast of that projectile. They fill the gap, they close the gap up, and then as they approach the battle line, the command front is given, and the regiment deploys into line of battle and conducts the relief in place. So, you know, well disciplined, problem. Disciplined enough to do multiple changing the front to the rear on left and right companies, problem.
What kind of casualties are they taking during this maneuver process? So they come up with about 345.
Well,
You're exposing. You don't see like back at the long end of the line. What kind of casualties are they taking?
the semi-weekly report of effectives of Hazen's brigade, dated September 19, shows the 9th Indiana as having 30 officers and 298 men for a total strength of 328. They've taken some casualties out there. This is going to be the bulk of their casualties, and I don't think Seaman says, but I'll look here. I don't remember that.
He has like a breakdown for this particular.
They definitely don't break down
Yes.
between Brock and here. I don't even think he breaks down by day.
Yeah, he does by day.
He does?
Yeah, let's see. For the day, the 9th Indiana is going to have a total loss of 8 commissioned officers and 69 men, of whom 16 were killed or mortally wounded, and 8 missing, 5 of whom are supposed killed. And he says,
21 casualties out of 320.
um,
Precisely 25.
25%. He goes on to say, during the engagement of the 19th, the regiment fired 140 rounds of ammunition per man.
Wow. Woof.
That is 3.5 cartridge boxes of
Some hot
ammunition.
barrels.
What was the issue between Hazen and the colonel?
They had to find their own.
There's no way.
And I don't think there's anything really substantive to it. I think it's just a personality conflict. So
Many of these issues stem, and this is a generic comment, not a specific comment to this one. Many of them stem from small infractions of command that would seem inexplicable to us, but matters of military discipline and heightened, of course, by personality.
Hazen doesn't feel like the type of guy that would overlook anything either, you know. He's like a left out to line, yeah.
10 pegs on the line? What's wrong with you?
and Hazen's brigade in the winter, spring, and early summer of 1863 is actually in a very important position outside of Murfreesboro. They are the most eastern infantry force of the Army of the Cumberland. They are about 9 miles east of Murfreesboro at Reedyville. And the next closest infantry, the other 2 brigades of Palmer's division, are 3 or 4 miles back further to the west. Now, on a regular basis, there are federal cavalry probes out to the east of Reedyville, but Hazen's men are literally out there on the extreme edge of the Army of the Cumberland. And so some of this extreme discipline that Hazen expects is absolutely required. And they have to picket the entire circumference of their camp there. And they actually build a little fort up on top of a knoll or rise adjacent to the larger camping area. I guess is probably a fortified point should they ever get suddenly attacked by the Confederates. So there's a real reason why he's kind of a stickler on some of these things, because they're out there, and to the east of Reedyville and southeast of Reedyville, guess who is out there? John Hunt Morgan. So Morgan has the reputation at the time of raiding.
He's not very successful out there at 63.
Morgan is not.
He's not successful.
Mainly, I think, because of the attentiveness
Yes.
of the Federals,
Yeah.
and then
And his lack of attentiveness or misdirected attentiveness to his new bride.
and Rosecrans and Crittenden and Palmer and Stanley are all on a regular, and Wilder, once Wilder begins to mount, they are all regularly probing out that way and keeping Morgan on his toes or even on the front. So in one of those raids, they captured Mrs. Morgan in McMinnville. So they didn't really do anything with her, but they did capture her. One of the 9th Indiana soldiers, an officer, D.B. McCall, will write. They've been relieved by some of by troops out to the east. Says we returned, replenished our ammunition, and were at once sent to the right. Marched upon an elevation of ground where there was a house, barn, garden, and the surroundings of a farmhouse. Yet another relatively detailed description of the Brotherton farmstead. Before us, the ground was heavily wooded. There, we relieved an Indiana regiment, I think the 75th. Soon, the woods in front of us became swarming with the enemy, not 100 yards away. We opened fire, and our fire seemed to check them. We could see plainly the effect. Mounted officers went down under special aim. We lost heavily. After a time, the regiment was ordered back, as I was informed. I did not see it go. My Company K and Healy's Company G are towards the left end of the regiment, closest to the buildings of the Brotherton Farm. Did not go with the regiment. As we fell back, we met the regiment returning, and taking our place, we came back with them. In a short time, we were ordered back again to the foot of a hill. Even though that they were well disciplined in that maneuver that was successfully conducted, the left, probably the left 2 companies, maybe even the left 3 companies, got separated, maybe because they were taking shelter around some of the features of the Brotherton farmstead and didn't see the maneuver begin.
This Confederate breakthrough here doesn't go unnoticed, and it's not just by Hazen. Rosecrans, who's been trying to bring troops up all day, is aware of it, and he's going to request, send word to Thomas that he needs help, and Thomas is going to pull troops out of a line to the north and bring them south, which is another consequential decision. But also, just as importantly, James Negley's division, 2 brigades of it, are finally coming onto the battlefield at about 4:30 in the afternoon, and they will be the primary force. Where's Don? He was asking about who was opposing Clayton out there in the far end of the field. While Hazen's people are down here, nobody is really doing his efforts. But as Negley comes up, he forms in the Dyer Field on that next big hill to the west, where Rosecrans headquarters sits today. The headquarters on the 20th, that monument that the capital. And his 2 brigades are going to go in line and actually conduct what they expect to be a counterattack through these woods to restore the line here in Brotherton Field. We're not going to go down that far. I just want you to be aware of the fact that there are large numbers of Union troops converging from a number of different directions. What wasn't that long ago that we did Bushrod Johnson, and we talked about Harper's Brigade. It's coming up the Brotherton Road from the south. I'm sorry, the Lafayette Road from the south, and moving into the rear of this mass of Confederates. So Hazen from the north, Harper from the south. You've got Negley deploying there, and Thomas sends John Brannan's division, and it will move out into the North Biofield area. It will not come into combat. Brannan's troops don't get down here in time to come into combat. But it's another example of Rosecrans bringing forces from multiple directions to try and seal this breach. And it largely succeeds. Ultimately, Clayton simply retreats through the timber and back into the woods on this side of the road without becoming engaged. They take a couple of skirmish shots, and I think Negley's people lose one man. One man. So it doesn't blow up into yet another large action, but night really brings the action to a close before it can blow up. But just be aware of all of these multiple forces moving in that Rosecrans is attempting to use to rebuild a solid line.
On the Confederate side, we've had Cheatham of Polk, we've had Stewart of Butler, we've had Law's Alabama Brigade of Law's Division, or Hood's Division of Hood's Corps, and we rightly questioned the disjointed command structure of the Confederates and how that played into not being able to exploit this advantage, and also how just difficult it was to control things, and part of the reason why they're not able to exploit that advantage. But think about it from the Union perspective. You've got Beatty Van Cleve of Crittenden. You've got Hazen of Palmer's division of Crittenden's Corps. You've got Negley coming up, Brannan coming down. You've got intermixing of commands here. But look how much better the Federals are doing at coordinating things to seal off this breach than the Confederates are in exploiting it. However, remember earlier I said the Federals do have that advantage of essentially fighting on the defensive. They have a little more time to react. But still, you've got a lot more example of Federal leaders working as a team than you do on the Confederate side.
And Rosecrans is generally closer to the front than Bragg.